the bookshop, it's the bookshop, it's the bookshop of Beverly Farms.
Howdy, everybody. It is Sam Feifel, your host of John Updike's Ghost, your favorite podcast about reading, authors, books, Labor Day weekend, being on a lake, all things fun, exciting, and awesome. And I'm here, as always, with my sister, the co-owner of the bookshop of Beverly Farms, and all-around great person, Hannah Harlow. How are you doing, Hannah?
I'm still recovering from this morning when I woke up and walked out into the living room and was told there was no more coffee in the house.
I don't think that is what you were
And
told
my dear
exactly.
brother said, don't worry, there's black tea.
There's black tea that you can get your caffeine fix with.
So 8 cups of black tea and 2 Advil later, I'm doing fine.
Really? There's a lot of caffeine in black tea, so it should not have really taken that much.
It only took 2.
Interesting. I was not aware. I only had 1 cup of coffee this morning. I normally have 2. I limited myself to 1 because I was rationing to make sure that you had some.
I did get a sip.
A sip.
Yeah.
That's good. I will remind you that we actually brought the coffee to the domicile.
Yeah, we didn't bring anything.
So if you had wanted coffee, you would think you would.
And I woke up late.
Bring some coffee. And yes,
it's all my fault, obviously.
It was like 9:30. You'll know, dear readers, that Hannah blew the time at which we normally record this because she was luxuriating, not waking up on time.
Well, I was up late reading.
Up late reading?
I was.
Wow, that's fantastic. What is it that you were up so late reading?
So I just finished Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips.
Which has a great cover.
Has a great cover. And I really, really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the first chapter and almost didn't continue because it was written in this kind of like very voicey voice.
It looks like it's in Downton Abbey or something.
It's actually set in West Virginia.
Oh.
Alternating between 1864 and 1874. Okay. So it's Civil War and kind of the post-Civil War.
Reconstruction.
Yeah. And the building on the cover, this kind of elaborate, big estate-looking thing, is actually
a prison.
An insane asylum.
Oh, that was close.
Yeah. For men and women, kind of split. And it was actually They seem to, and this is all based on real events and not events, but research. This is an actual.
There was an asylum of this kind in West Virginia in the post-Civil War era.
And there was this doctor the treatment is based on his writings. And they treated everyone pretty respectfully.
Oh, really?
Which was nice.
So this is not a story of everybody being terrorized by wacky psychological flimflammery.
Right. The characters are terrorized by other things, by sort of the war itself.
Right.
And there is this, so the book opens and this young girl who's 12 and her mom are being dropped off at the insane asylum by this man who he calls himself Papa, and so you're not really sure who he is, if he is actually the girl's dad and the woman's husband, or it becomes pretty obvious early on that he's maybe not. But he is sort of terrorizing this family, and he is now, discarding them at the insane asylum. So they have throughout the book, they keep rewriting their stories. And you go back in time and figure out how they ended up here in the asylum. It's all very well constructed. So you get different points of view that keep enlightening you as to like what's happening and giving you different sides of the story and making it richer.
Did the people really exist, or are they fictional people?
No, these are fictional people.
Okay.
Right.
It's very similar to the book that I just read.
Really?
Which is this Zadie Smith.
Oh, yeah. The new Zadie Smith.
Yes, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
Huge. As you will know. Because it's very similar. It is set between like 1830 and 1875.
Wow.
In England.
In England, yes.
In England. But the Civil War is definitely a topic of conversation. The abolitionist movement is a big topic of conversation. But in her case, she has taken sort of real people and created fictional adventures for them.
Including Dickens?
Yes. So the central character is a woman, Mrs. Touche, and she is the cousin and housekeeper and former like weird bestiality lover. Not bestiality, that's the wrong word.
Okay.
Like dominatrixy stuff. Like he has her like whip him and stuff.
Got it.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Master and servant type deal.
Right.
And they're cousins.
And
it's very odd. The little side project, I'm not sure if it's like real or if she made that part up or whatever. But Mrs. Touche was a real person for sure. And the author that she was cousin to is this guy, William Ainsworth, who definitely was real, wrote 41 novels, but none of them are in print right now. So basically lost to history, just like the, Emily in Paris of the 1850s and 60s or whatever. It'd be interesting. There are all sorts of little asides and little texts that she's uncovered because the central fraud, the name of the book is The Fraud. The central fraud is this dude who pretends to be the heir to this big fortune in London, right? Mm-hmm. And this heir, Sir Roger, was theoretically lost in a shipwreck. And so, his cousins got all of his money and estates. But this butcher from Wapping comes back and is like, I'm Sir Roger. And for whatever reason, there's this populist uprising behind him. And so it really all reads as like an allegory for the frauds of our day, whether it's Trump or what's the Trump equivalent? The guy who got like embarrassed out of prime ministership but looked like Trump and had the bad hair. And
Boris.
Yeah. So I think it's mostly like kind of a play on Boris and all of these, because there's a whole piece about how the same populist uprising that supported the fake Sir Roger, all of their arguments are just like nonsense. It's like, if you ever lied about something once, then you're a liar forever, and therefore you can't provide actual evidence. And this smallpox vaccine seems like a scam, and they just, blah, 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 blah. So lots of parallels with our day. But apparently all of these characters are real, and the testimony that she provides from this trial as to whether Sir Roger is real or not is actual real testimony that she went and dug up from the courts or whatever, which makes it all the more crazy because, it's, I don't know how she could have made it up. It's like, it's too crazy to be even fiction. But, it's very hyper literary, but there really isn't any like plot to speak of. Like, I guess the central rising action is like whether this fraud will like succeed and be Sir Roger or not, or maybe it's like whether the William will, live up to his reputation or go into obscurity, or, they're all different, trying to figure out who exactly is the fraud is part of it. Right. Ultimately, Mrs. Touchett, who is the Touche, I think we're meant to see that she believes herself ultimately to be the fraud because she allowed herself to be subject to all of these discriminations and put downs as a woman. And really, she was more talented than William. And really, she saw through all this stuff. But ultimately, she kind of the novel ends with her feeling sort of that she had shanked her life, I think, is what it comes down to.
So you've read a bunch of Zadie Smith.
I've read every Zadie Smith.
And where do you think this falls in her?
Well, I think, it feels a little bit like she doesn't know what story to tell anymore, right? Like she went and like she's not writing any original story here. It's like she's painting a still life almost, she's taking this story that is super interesting, like this phenomenon of why the hoi polloi would get behind this dude who's trying to take over this like giant fortune, and acting like he's one of them when in reality he's trying to take over his fortune. And, it's all very strange. And it definitely felt didactic at times. Like I was being given a lesson on the slave trade in Jamaica. And,
Right.
like there's a lot of, allegorical stuff, it all felt like this big giant parallel. And like, you read something like NW or Northwest. I don't know how you actually say that novel out loud.
NW,
I think it's
yeah.
NW. But like that is like this super grimy, like true feeling story about real people living in a real place. But it wasn't, she had
Yeah.
invented it, I'm sure from experience and her family or whatever. But it just felt like, oh, I'm getting this insight into something that I could never have seen before. Whereas this felt like, it definitely at times I was like, am I reading a nonfiction account of something? Like there's definitely and that's why I've only read 2 books in the last couple weeks, because it definitely felt like a slog. Like it's one of those books you read like, you read like 10 pages and then, oh wow, my phone's in my hand. What happened there? It just didn't grip
wasn't
me
as gripping.
the way her stuff can really grip. And I've been like, I just went and looked it up. We went and saw her speak at Space Gallery in Portland, Maine in 2001 when she was like just released White Teeth and was like this.
That's
phenom.
amazing.
And it's really funny to think of because it was her and this dude, Arthur Bradford. You ever heard of him? He's like a short story writer. He wrote this book, Dog Walker. And at the time, the two of them were like peers, like, oh, these 2 hot new writers. And now like, he's like, I don't know who the hell is Arthur Bradford. And she's like, Bradford. Like, But at the time, he was so much more entertaining. He like did these songs and like cut himself on his guitar and was bleeding all over the place. And I think Zadie was like, "Who is this clown?" Right?
Right.
But they were like, I think they were friends. That maybe they'd gone to the same writing school or something. I don't know. But no, I think it's a mid-career novel, right? Like she's mid-career. She can do what she wants. She's like, I'm going to write this book. You're going to read it because I'm Zadie Smith. And, it felt like something she felt like it felt like a vanity project. Like this is a cool story. I'm going to write it up. It's 450 pages. You're going to like it.
Okay. So that's The Fraud.
That's The Fraud.
Comes out September 5th, I believe.
5th? Let me see.
I think we just had it in the store.
Yeah, 9/5. Yeah, September 5th.
There are some similarities to another book I read recently that's called Dayswork. And it's by Chris Batchelor and Jennifer Hable.
Chris Batchelor.
Yes, and they are married.
Mm-hmm.
So they wrote this book together. And it is kind of a COVID book. It's set during quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an interesting book. And I really enjoyed it. And I plowed through it. Like I read it really quickly. But it's hard to talk about what it's about and why it's so good.
It's like what, a living room drama?
Basically it's told in the voice of the wife of this family,
and
they're in lockdown during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
The husband, for most of the time, is stuck in the basement quarantining because he was exposed to COVID.
Okay.
And they have 2 daughters who are somewhat around. But for the most part, it's the woman doing research into Melville. She is perhaps writing a book about Melville. And it's essentially a Melville, but weird Melville biography.
Yeah. And he's like hot now again for some reason.
I mean, this book is just, it makes it seem so ridiculous. It's just like all these famous writers. She's like quoting all these famous writers talking about how much they love Melville.
Yeah, everybody loves
Melville. Everybody loves Moby Dick. And you get his kind of life story and his obsession with Hawthorne and a little bit of their relationship. And she's sort of trying to figure out what's true and what's not true.
Right.
Kind of digging through various biographers' notes and letters and then the real letters and like what's been lost and what they actually have and what speculation. And then you also get the story of Melville's marriage, kind of what seemed to be a pretty troubled marriage.
Uh-huh.
And then you also get the story of Elizabeth Hardwick and her marriage to Robert Lowell. And Elizabeth Hardwick was also obsessed with Melville and also had his troubled marriage. And then you have like the narrators, you're getting a little bit of their marriage. And I kept thinking, I think I'm supposed to be reading into a lot of this like Melville and Hardwick stuff to like figure out what's going on in this contemporary marriage. But I didn't actually get enough of like her and her husband's interactions to really understand what I was supposed to think about their marriage.
Right. Like, the pandemic is, the ultimate test. You're forced to be together.
And there was like this like brief reference to like the bad times. So I was like, so they maybe had like a rough patch in their marriage and they are on the other side, but maybe things aren't perfect. And like, she just like, it's like her reading stuff to her husband over FaceTime, like about Melville and then like his kind of responses to them. But I was like, I'm still a little lost on what I'm supposed to get from that. But it was all very interesting and like so well written. And like she was pointing out so many like absurdities and like, things that were true or not true, that it made it all super interesting. So I really liked it. But you also get the sense of like how much the women did, and let the men get all the glory.
Right. I mean, that's,
that's a very common
It's the same
theme.
thing with The Fraud. It's very much a feminist novel in that way. The behind the scenes caretaking of all of the...
Well, and actually that's what I liked about the Jane Ann Phillips book, the first book I talked about, Night Watch, is that I felt like you were really getting like the women's story of the war.
Right.
Like,
yes. Which does not get told.
Which does not.
You get like the one nurse who like chopped off people's legs, but
but these were like
not what it was like on the home front when all the men are off dying.
Right. And they were surviving.
On nothing.
Right.
Exactly.
And just like protecting themselves because they were in so much danger from just like roving soldiers.
Exactly. They just come through and burn your whole plantation down.
And rape you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, interesting parallels actually between that and the other book that I'm reading, which is this, In Other Words, Leadership book.
I would not think there were a lot of parallels here.
There's actually a ton of parallels. So this is a book by Shannon Mullen, who is a journalist, I guess. She's an essay writer type person. I haven't looked into her that hard, but I know that she writes like other, nonfiction journalism type stuff. And what it is, so the subhead is How a Young Mother's Weekly Letters to Her Governor Helped Both Women Brave the First Pandemic Year.
So a pandemic
It's a pandemic story, but it's also, really a feminist story because the governor in question is Janet Mills, governor of Maine right now. She is the first woman governor in our history. And I think you could probably make the argument that she's the most impressive woman ever to live in Maine. She was also the first attorney general. She was the first district attorney that was a woman in all of New England.
Just like right across the lake right now.
And she also has a camp on our lake, which I'm not sure we're supposed to mention. Luckily, we don't have a big listenership. In the book, they do not mention the name of the lake that she retires to for a little solace. They just say it's a lake in central Maine, which is very much not where we are. But that's all right. It might be a little sleight of hand. I don't know. But basically, it is a very faithful and studious account of the first pandemic year from the perspective of Governor Mills and this woman who lives out in Temple, which is the next town over from where we are, next town over from Farmington. And she is a hardcore back to the lander with her husband who studied with this Buddha-like Maine guide to learn how to live off the land and teach other people to live off the land. And at the beginning of the pandemic, she starts writing a weekly letter to Governor Mills, telling her good job, but then also just rambling on about their little experience on the farm where they're off the grid, they have no indoor plumbing, they have no electricity other than a generator, they grow like 80% of the food they eat or whatever. So you have this just weird correspondence that is the sort of through line of the book. And I thought it was going to be much more an epistolary novel type of thing where you get a whole letter and then you get a whole letter.
So the governor was writing back?
The governor started writing back.
Every week?
No. So that's what that's what I'm saying is that in the end, she just quotes from these letters. So basically what's happened is she must have gotten tipped off by someone on Janet's communication staff or whatever this was happening, right? Because Janet would get all these letters, and then she kept getting this one letter, and then she kept saying, I want to, make sure this letter gets to me if it comes in. Then she started replying to it.
Oh, cool.
And then, I don't think she replied every week. But so she also, not only did she get access to all the letters, but Janet gave her access to her personal journal that she keeps. So you get journal entries from the governor about like what happened that day.
Wow.
I was on a call with all the other governors, and this is the information we got from Trump, and Trump said this crazy shit. And, it's this really intimate behind the scenes, like what it was like to be governor, a woman governor that, was being slandered over and over by the previous governor, LePage, who then, ran against her and tried to get his job back. And it functions sort of as a biography of Janet Mills, ultimately. Like, you get a lot of backstory. For us, it's really cool. Like, there's this whole big section on her stepdaughter, Liesel, which is my friend Pat's wife. So I know Liesel, and like,
That's cool.
I'm like, that's cool or whatever. And then there's this point where she goes and sees a quote unquote folk band at the Narrow Gauge Theater, and then invites them back to the camp to play on her lawn, which I remember happening. And that was the Mallet Brothers band. But they are not a folk band. But whatever. Like why not call them the Mallet Brothers band? I don't know why they're secret or whatever, but we're not allowed to know the name of that band for some reason. But I remember it happening. So it's very cool. I'm not sure I'm going to finish it. I'm only halfway through because like I know what happened. Like, it wasn't long enough ago that any of this I don't remember. Like I was like super on top of it. I was covering the campaign. I actually interviewed Janet a couple of times during this.
Right.
There's all the things that she references. I'm like, yeah, I remember that. She, and she's very faithful. There's almost no like editorializing from her at all. It's just like, this is what happened.
So if someone were not as close as you are to all of this information, like would they find the book interesting?
I'm not sure. So I didn't want to read it, because everything about it is like super, like, it's hard to even, like, you sound like a jerk, but like, it's devoid of all irony, sarcasm, like it is heartfelt, earnest, like, what a wonderful, connection of writing between these two women at opposite ends of the power spectrum. But like, it's true, right? Like, it's like almost uncool to say that you like really respect and like a politician, but I really respect and like Janet Mills. Like we have some major policy differences, but like, I think she's genuinely an awesome person who tries really hard to do the best thing with her job. Like, I think she takes being governor super seriously, and that comes through. Like, you can hear her voice in her journal entries where she's like, gosh, these people, sure don't seem very kind, but I'm just going to do my best, and like, she's not in any way hip or like savvy or whatever. She's like, I'm going to read, she put a little strip of poetry in, because she's a poet, know. And so it's like, she's a published poet. She's been published for a long time, and she reads poetry on, the state radio addresses. And she's like this really she left college to go to San Francisco in the summer of 1969 because she wanted to be there. She's like an old school hippie who happens to now be the most accomplished woman in the history of Maine. And it's like such a crazy, dichotomy, because you think of like every successful politician as being this like conniving, power hungry person. And she's the opposite of that. She's like, yeah, so I ran for governor because I thought to myself, I could do that. I'm pretty good at that sort of thing, You're like, you're right. You are pretty freaking good at that sort of thing,
I mean, I met her, right?
Yeah, remember? You met her on the dock.
On the dock.
You didn't even know who she was.
And I didn't realize. I was like, this is a nice grandmother to these kids that were getting in our boat. And then we like drove away, and Sam was like, that was Governor Mills. And I was shocked. She just was so normal.
She's a very, very normal person. Like, there was this ad during her last campaign where, she was like on the dock fishing with her grandchildren, and like, all these just cynical, douchebags online are like, oh, how manufactured, look at her, you know. And Pat, you know, who's her son-in-law, is like, no, that's what she does. She goes and fishes off the end of the dock with her grandkids, you know. And like, he was like, that's the only commercial that was real.
Right.
You know, because otherwise they try to give her a hairstyle and they try to give her some clothes, but you know, she's the type of person that just wears like t-shirt and sweatpants all day long, you know, like, so you have to get over that. Like, I feel like if you're a hyper online person, especially like me, like you're just so trained to be cynical of earnestness that you have to get past it. But I think she's genuinely, these people are genuinely these earnest people. They are what they seem.
I think it sounds interesting. The book.
It is.
I have zero segue. This I have a third book.
We had really good segues for all of those books. Are you telling me?
I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't talk about it because this book does just not fit in with the rest.
Why don't we save it till next time? We have already gone a good solid amount of time.
Great.
And it is sunny outside.
We'll save it for next time.
We'll save it for next time. But next time we will see you is at Andre Dubus III.
Yes.
He's coming to the Farms on September
17th,
which is a Sunday at 1:00 at Hastings House. Please RSVP ahead of time. We probably have about 20 or 30 seats left if you want to RSVP.
I'm halfway through his new book, Such Kindness, and I'll probably talk about that next time. It's really great. He's really great.
Well, we will record this after the event next time.
Then we'll talk about the event and how great his book is.
Right, exactly. And just get excited now. We have, can we talk about the next? No, we can't talk about. Okay, well, there's going to be another thing that's going to, it might even be bigger than Andre Dubus III, which actually definitely will be bigger, hopefully, otherwise we screwed it up. So stay tuned for that. And otherwise, we hope you had a great Labor Day weekend, just like we did. Say goodbye, Hannah.
Bye.